We have to call the meeting of the Board of Supervisors back to order. We are now on item number 21B. Let's take up a couple of these 21B and see they're kind of sort of related, but we'll take them up seriatim, please. 21B.
Okay, so yeah, I'm actually just going to present on both of them together.
All right,
but
good, that's fine.
Then you can vote on them separately, of course. Again, for the record, Susan Dorpansky, Planning Manager. This is a request from State Lands to amend the master plan on some land that they own, amend the master plan and change the zoning on some land that they own south of Highway 50 West at Lake Tahoe Golf Course Drive. I'll note for the record that there is late material related to this item. It was brought to my attention at the beginning of the week that the APNs were incorrect on some of the board items. So there's a memo in your packet that indicates where the APNs need to be corrected, which included the agenda, the board action reports, the staff reports, and then the ordinance. So there's a slight change in both of the recommended motions related to those APNs. It was a typo of one number that caused a change in every single document that we had, of course. So again, this is a request from the State Lands Division to change the master plan and the zoning on about 66 acres south of Highway 50 West at Lake Tahoe Golf Course Drive, which is connected to the north from Clear Creek Drive, as shown on this aerial that I have up on the screen here. All four of the parcels are surrounding Tahoe Golf Course Drive, which is this road here. The one parcel kind of runs along the north of it. There's a small parcel here at the curve, and then these two large parcels here. The applicant's requesting that the master plan be changed from its current designation of public, quasi-public, to rural residential, which is what you see in the green to the west. So it'll provide for consistency with adjacent property in the area. And then they're also requesting, in conjunction with that, the change of the zoning, which is currently conservation reserve, to single family 5 acre. So right now the zoning to the east is also single family 5 acre. They are requesting to change it so there's consistency there as well. The state ultimately desires to dispose of this property, and they had approached Carson City to determine what the best use of the property would be, which we would determine because of the rural residential in the area would be single family 5 acre. They feel that that would be the highest and best use of the land when it comes to disposing of it. The city agrees. And so as a result of that, we have brought this application forward on their behalf. In addition to that, we feel that it's important for us as the city to support this because there's a trailhead and a trail in this area that we would ultimately like to see built. It'll complete the Clear Creek Trail from from Jacks Valley Road to the south. It's shown on our Unified Pathways Master Plan, as shown as in this aerial here. We feel that, and the State Lands agrees, that if we change the zoning and they ultimately sell it off, we can work to obtain the trail and the trailhead in the future with development in a quicker manner than we could if it were to stay conservation reserve. Charlie Donahue from State Lands is here in the audience to answer any questions if you have them, and I can answer any as well.
Well, I suspect you're going to get some questions.
Yeah. Oh, and one thing actually I did want to note is from the Planning Commission, the recommendation for approval, right, how that worked. The Planning Commission is required to recommend approval to the Board of Supervisors on a master plan amendment by a 2/3 vote. They did not have 2/3 attendance at their last meeting, so while they voted 4-0 in favor of it, they can't officially recommend to you an approval on that, but they did recommend approval on the zone change, and they did have 4-0 in favor of the master plan amendment as well.
Okay, let me just kind of, I know we'll probably get into it a little deeper here, but let me ask, why wouldn't the trailhead access be available even if it retains its current zoning?
State Lands has not been able to successfully provide it to us up to this point, and they believe that they will be able to do it better, or someone beyond them would be able to do it with development through clustering of the zoning, a clustering of development on the property.
So they think that development dollars will pay for a trailhead as opposed to public dollars?
It's possible. I believe that people will continue to work for a trailhead with state lands, but state lands has not been able to provide it to us at this point.
Okay. Where's the secondary access for this property go if it goes for residential?
So the primary access is off of the Tahoe Golf Course Drive, and when it comes forward to develop, they will need to have a secondary access onto Tahoe Golf Course Drive as well, if they were to develop. So it'd be 2 locations on Tahoe Golf Course Drive that they would access.
And so what would happen if the freeway were blocked by a fire? You couldn't use that as an access. What happens then?
They would have to use Old Clear Creek Road.
Who owns Old Clear Creek Road? Okay, well, I guess.
No, I see where you're going.
I know Mr. Donahue is here, and he probably knows as well as we do. We've been through this a lot. And I think, and I can see that it's coming, and I see the lights on here. And because there's an issue with respect to whether or not this should be residentially zoned out there or not, because we have all these problems with Clear Creek Road, who owns it, yada, yada. And I think that at the end of the day, our legal counsel has told us, it's not Carson City that owns Clear Creek Road. But then there's a question is, okay, who does? And that's a problem with access issues on a multiple levels. And so, and I also don't know, how someone intends to handle water and sewer here on these pieces of property here if we zone them residential. Does it have an answer to that?
Yeah, I can defer actually to Danny Rotter on that. He can come up to the podium and answer that question.
So tell me they're going to connect the city sewer and not be, no.
Sorry, I was Danny Rotter for the record. Public Works. I was talking with
if
Lee.
it's changed residential, how do you handle city water? How do you handle sewer and water issues on that piece of property?
So this site before was connected to city sewer, and we would require them to connect anything here to connect to city sewer as well, because there's a sewer line on the eastern side that crosses Tahoe Golf Club Drive. Water would be most likely domestic wells if there were any homes here. A community water system would work, but they'd have to find water rights, and I don't see that happening.
I want to be a good partner with the state. I want to be, and I think you're absolutely right. We work well together. but we've had access problems come off of US Highway 50 there. Particularly, when we were through these last drills, the state was pretty adamant, NDOT anyway, was pretty adamant. We don't want any other accesses coming off that piece of property. And I guess, you got to help me understand why this is going to solve a problem and not create more as we go down the road. Not just for the state, but for us as well. Help me understand that. Or maybe,
Yeah, so I guess what I can say in response to that is if Tahoe Golf Course Drive were not there, we probably would not be having this conversation, because accesses onto Highway 50 would be something that we would need to be looking at. But because Tahoe Golf Course Drive is there, the feasibility of residential becomes more real.
Susan, how much residential are we talking? If it's single 5 acre, how many potential homes would be there?
It's 11 or 12.
Okay.
So it is 11 or 12 homes. It's 66 acres total.
Okay.
Sorry, Jim. I don't see anything in our documents that says that if we change the zoning in the master plan here, that we're going to have the ability going into the future to work out an agreement on the trailhead. But what I do see is a request by the state to have the city help them increase the value of their property so that they can sell it. So I see some benefit to the state. I don't necessarily see any benefit to the city. So unless somebody has an argument against that, I'm having a really difficult time with this item.
Maybe we could have Charlie answer that question for you.
I saw you sitting back there smiling. Good morning. How's state lands doing?
Good morning, Mr.
Morning.
Mayor, board members. For the record, Charles Donahue, I'm the administrator for the Division of State Lands. Could you repeat the question regarding?
I don't see anything in our documents that, that show me that if we change the master plan and the zoning, that we're going to acquire the rights or have the ability to enter into an agreement for the trailhead. It's speculation that it might make it easier for us, but there's no guarantee for us. But the flip side for the state is, I see the state coming to us and asking for our help to make their land more valuable so they can sell it. So I'm just having trouble seeing the benefit to Carson City. I see the benefit to the state. I don't
Sure.
see the benefit to us because we may not necessarily want more houses up there.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we need to take a step back because, in fact, the applicant is Carson City. And the designation for a trail, excuse me, for a trailhead is on your citywide plan for trails. So at the time that the state were to dispose of this property, whoever purchased it and moved towards development would be responsible for putting in a trailhead at that location. Taking a further step back, I think you'll hear some testimony about how the trailhead and the request for a trailhead was, it's my understanding, was for the development over in Douglas County to the north. There were conversations, I believe, with Division of State Land staff in terms of agreeing to have a trailhead. Unfortunately, that was never brought to our administrator's approval level, and my prior administrator has, at the time, took the position that we would no longer continue to encumber this property with authorizations that would potentially make it more difficult when we're trying to dispose of the property. So, yeah, I can understand where you feel that the city isn't getting anything out of it, but I think that it is an equitable request for the state to have their property zoned very similarly to the property that is adjacent to theirs, and I think that's how I would respond to you. I'd be more than happy to answer any other questions as well.
Charles, I think there might be some.
Sure.
John?
The issue here, I'd like to hear what people have to say, so we have an entire record and we have an entire discussion on it. But I think sticking our head at Carson City, Douglas County, Forest Service, Washoe Tribe, all of the parties, the people that own property out there, all of them sticking their head in the sand and saying that Clear Creek Road is not a thoroughfare of the future. I think is sticking your head in the sand. I think the money has to be found someplace, and that road has to be built and made a public road. That's too valuable of a piece of land out there to not have access to Carson City at the Fuji Park area. Having said that, it's my understanding that right now, Clear Creek Road is owned by the people that own property out there, and any or all of them could gate their property and not allow access. Now, that's something the lawyers would have to work out. I'm not suggesting that I'm offering legal advice, but I would suggest that is my understanding of what our legal staff has told Carson City. And Carson City has decided not to put any money in there. We've had this discussion at the RTC. So until you figure out what you're going to do with Clear Creek Drive, then all you're doing is creating additional pressure by changing the zoning and building new houses. We approved some changes to the zoning on the property across the street. That entire area out there is going to be built up, and I suppose we could put our head in the sand and say, we'll approve this, we'll approve that, and leave the problem for somebody in the future. I would prefer this board to sit down and solve the problem. Having said that, I know that's not the appetite of the board and Carson City as of right now. So the gentleman's request is reasonable. Let's approve it so that it's all the same zoning and build pressure on that entire area. And one of these days, we're going to spend $1 million, $2 million out there rebuilding that road.
Well, if it were only that amount, I think we could get it done.
That's our share.
Yeah, okay. Charles, kind of give us a sense of what, I'm sure you've been talking to our staff about the issues we've had out there, particularly about Clear Creek Road and the secondary access, fire access, stuff like that. And when you get it rezoned, okay, what are you going to tell prospective buyers of that property about the issues we've got out there? I mean, I guess that's what we're trying to get at here, and I am anyway. So.
Honestly, Mayor, I haven't really given that much thought. I know that the staff received comments from the fire department about a secondary access. That would be a secondary access to the golf course drive itself. I think you have a very valid point in terms of fire and Highway 50 being blocked. For the state to dispose of land by statute, we have to go through a rather arduous process. And I can't see us disposing of this immediately. And some of the items that you've raised in terms of Clear Creek, yes, I am aware of them, but I think the state would be a partner in trying to solve them, but I sure as heck haven't put a lot of time and energy into trying to figure that out.
I don't know if Jim, did you have Charles, or go ahead. You don't have to stand up. Why don't you
Okay.
sit in the front here, because don't go all the way in the back yet. I suspect you're going to be standing up again here, but thank you. Okay, Supervisor Shirk, go.
I think Supervisor McKenna brought up some good points. I don't necessarily know that rezoning this causes the problem to create solution for Clear Creek at this moment, but it will certainly down the line. But I think, in generally speaking, we can rezone this regardless of access or anything else. Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, because that's what we're doing is basically rezoning this. We're not looking at, or do we need to look at the access, which Mr. McKenna brought up, and all the other issues? Is that all tied to the same thing? And if it isn't, then I think we would approve it. But if it is tied to it, it should be part of this package that we're looking at. So I'm confused as to, I understand the points of interest that were brought up, but does that have any bearing on the rezoning of this property?
So you can look at the access in general terms, yes, when you're considering a zone change in master plan. You just really can't look at it from a specific standpoint of where is it going to go and exactly how is it going to exist, because there's no way that we can condition these approvals. So if changing this zoning and master plan by increasing the density causes additional pressure on Clear Creek Road, or perceived pressure, that's something that you certainly could take into consideration, yes.
So we can do that, but have you done that? Has the planning commission looked at that and have solutions for us? Should we bring it up, which we have?
So we have looked at it, but because of the proximity to Highway 50 and Tahoe Golf Course Drive, we don't feel that it's going to have a significant impact on Clear Creek Road.
Can I mention something real quick? Danny Rotter, Public Works, just wanted to make a comment that it's not going to solve everything, but when looking at the city requirements for any development that came in here, when we talk about primary and secondary access, the legal access on Highway 50 and Tahoe Golf Club Drive is how you get to this property. Then the primary access is off of Tahoe Golf Club Drive, and the secondary access is out of the subdivision to a legal access to get out. Now, someplace on Tahoe Golf Club Drive, you'd have a loop or something there. When we look, so we're looking at the boundaries of that, of how you get to that property. There's legal access up 50 and onto the site. So primary and secondary from the site to the main road. Now, Old Clear Creek Road, because of its status, we can't say is a secondary. The secondary is to get from your house, if a fire's at your house or your neighbor's house, to get to Tahoe Golf Club Drive in 50. So when we're looking, our comments related to this, as far as the primary and secondary access, are just to Tahoe Golf Club Drive. The bigger thing, obviously, is how you fix Clear Creek Road, but the impacts of changing this, we only looked at Tahoe Golf Club Drive, if that is any help.
Danny, not to belabor it, but you know, if there's a fire there, what you're telling me, I mean, is you can go up and down golf course, the golf course, Tahoe, what is that road called again?
Tahoe Golf Club Drive.
Tahoe Golf Club. You can go up and down Tahoe Golf Club Drive, but you can't go anywhere out of there. I mean, it doesn't get you out of the area. I mean,
As far as city code goes, looking at a development here,
Yeah.
is what I'm talking about. So
does
if there was a
Tahoe Golf
development
Club,
at the end of
does that
Kings
drive get out of
Canyon Road,
does that drive get out in Douglas County? Can you?
no,
So it's just a road internal.
yep. What,
Yeah, go ahead. I'm
let me
sorry.
just use another analogy. If there was 20 acres on Kings Canyon Road up at the end, and we required primary and secondary access, we would require primary and secondary access to Kings Canyon Road. We wouldn't require them to go north past our treatment plant, tie into Ash Canyon, is what I'm trying to get at. So yes, in that instance, if Kings Canyon Road was closed, there would have to be another plan. But if the neighbor's home was on fire in the subdivision and they couldn't go south, they could go west and get to Kings Canyon Road.
All right, well, we may be going far on these things. Let's go down here and we'll come back around. So Supervisor Abad, and we'll come back to this one.
Well, first of all, I agree with John totally. And one of my comments is that if Carson City doesn't own Clear Creek Road, who's going to drive this conversation? Because that issue does have to be dealt with ultimately down the road. But speaking for Joel Dunn from the CVB, who could not stay here, they totally are in support. The CVB is in support of this rezoning because they're looking to the future, and in terms of the rebranding for the CVB, the ultimate hope that a trailhead does go in there, it provides the possibility of some increased tourism for the area. So I'm just expressing Joel's support of this.
Well, it seems to me that it would be more appropriate to address these issues if and when the property is disposed of by the state to a developer, because then we can condition items like access, the trailhead, all these other items that we want to discuss today, but we can't condition the change in the master plan or the zoning today. We could if it was a developer that was bringing this forward to us with a project. So for myself, I would rather not deal with this today and deal with it if and when this property is disposed of by the state and it comes back to us with a project attached so that we can solve these problems. Right now, everything is speculation. The trailhead speculation, access is speculation. Everything about this is, except for the part where the state gets to increase the value of their property. No offense, I would do it too, but that's the benefit of doing this today.
Jim, sorry.
I agree with Supervisor Bonkowski. We have a question presented to us today that has to do with zoning. And there's lots of ancillary things in there about possible trailheads, et cetera. I brought up a road. None of this can be solved today. The applicant probably has the right to have the zoning changed. I would just suggest to you that that's going to lead to other problems. If I had a house out on Clear Creek Road, I would have a fence across the road and a gate. and I would block it because it is my property, and no one has the right to cross my property. The second that happens, though, you're going to have 500 people back here in this boardroom very upset that their historic use of the property has been taken from them. So you can say the issue today is zoning this property, and that is our only item we can consider. Or you can be realistic and understand that the entire area needs to be dealt with. If we don't deal with it today, we're going to end up with a situation like we have on the east side of town, when we have property, very nice houses, with no roads to them. The second that it rains hard and the road washes out, they suddenly want services. And then you have to either tell them no or spend a lot of money getting the services there. It's okay, I suppose, for government to sit here and say we're going to deal with the problem that's in front of us. But I guarantee you, in this case, we need to deal with this area for the future, because it is going to be developed and it's going to be very expensive. So I have no problem today voting yes on giving the state the zoning they want because they're entitled to it by law. But sticking your head in the sand and saying this problem is going to go away or can be dealt with when there's a buyer out there, I don't think that's realistic.
I don't know if I could say it any better, but a lot of issues were raised here, and I think per this agenda item, what we're doing is moving forward on the rezoning of it, which we can do, but I think there's a lot of issues that are going to be coming forward after this that haven't been resolved prior, and I don't know how they're going to get resolved in the future. But this board, looking at this agenda item, we're voting on this rezoning, which in all technicalities meets the criteria. I think there's a lot of issues that's going to be coming, after this, but I don't know how we're going to get away with not voting in favor of something that is, pretty much a basic rezoning. That's it. That's all that's before us today, regardless of the other issues that were raised.
Well, the comment I have is that I almost feel like it's a chicken and an egg thing in a lot of ways. But with that being said, I agree with what Brad says, but will this, if we approve this rezoning, help drive a developer to ultimately look at this? Can you?
Well, yeah, I mean, okay. Technically here, it's a zoning issue. And, for me, I'll just say, what, I'm really conflicted on this because I think that, yeah, I got it, that, it's Carson City's the applicant, it's zoned residential right next to it, and all other things being equal, this is a no-brainer, do it, get it done. The problem, I think, that I have is that we're creating a problem where there's not a problem now. I mean, and I got the idea that we, by making the problem even bigger by fostering development there, we're going to force an issue to come to our head. I would just, my own view is I'm reminded of what we went through when we went to the last development about who pays for what, and man, I'll tell you, you can stand up all you want and say that the developer is going to pay for all this stuff, but it didn't happen last time. So I'm concerned about creating a problem where, we are perpetuating a problem. I guess, I'll just leave it at that. I mean, so we'll take some public comment. Jim, before we go ahead, shoot.
Can I just ask a question? Valid points, Mayor, valid points. But can we have this come back to us with those solutions tied to it, rather than go forward and not have solutions? Can we have this come back to us with a solution that's and answers to everything that's been brought up at this board meeting today?
Well, yeah,
got a magic wand down there,
No,
just
right,
say
yeah,
yes.
Yes. So specifically, I mean, I think the biggest issue is Old Clear Creek Road. I think that we're all in agreement that that's the biggest issue. Am I able to tie the solution to Old Clear Creek Road to this? Not very well, no. Could it be tabled and then we don't bring it back until after it's solved? Yes. But I don't foresee that this one piece, the 66 acres, is going to drive whatever changes are going to need to happen on Old Clear Creek Road. That's something that has to be worked out with, multiple property owners along the entire length of it. So I don't believe it's feasible, no.
Okay. All right, public comment. Anybody want to weigh in on this quagmire? Anybody want to jump in here? The chief, the captain. Don't tell me you're going to bring your boat down and...
I don't have my boat with me this morning.
All right.
Stacy Giommi, Fire Chief. I was talking to Danny, and I want to mention, if we're looking at this, and I'm only speaking from an emergency egress perspective, as we looked at this, when we look at parcel maps and people developing parcel maps, we look at making sure that there's secondary access if need be, or access at all. We make sure a parcel doesn't get landlocked, in other words, and you can't get to it, that there's no legal way to get to it. Clear Creek Road exists in that parcel with the last number 35. You see it in the lower left-hand corner. That's the loop or the upper access of it's actually a driveway to the old camp. Outside of that, Tahoe Golf Course Drive goes all the way down into Douglas County, and there is emergency egress past the golf course into Douglas County. So if you take Clear Creek off the table, that road has two accesses and two egresses, one to Highway 50 and one emergency one back down Tahoe Golf Club Drive, past the golf course and out into Douglas County. So outside of the only issue with that is that you, as the board members here, can't control. So I don't know, and Danny might have to answer that, or the state might have to answer that, if these parcels had legal egress all the way down to that emergency road or not. That would be a question you'd have to ask. And then Clear Creek is off the table because you've got a road that has two points of egress. Make sense? I don't know what it looks like or what the subsequent parcels look like in Douglas County and how that legal access exists there. But I believe Danny might have been involved with that part.
So you're saying that the owners of the other parcels of property in there, the current homeowners, let's say, can block Old Clear Creek Road and not impact the fire department's?
No, I'm not saying that. They cannot legally block for fire access. They cannot legally block Clear Creek Road unless they comply with the fire code requirements. They can block it. They can put a gate up. They have to put a key switch on it or some other device that we would require. And I'm only speaking from my perspective because we're getting way down a rabbit hole here. In terms of Clear Creek Road, if it's determined that it's all private property and the property owners come to the fire department and say, we want to put up a gate, I would say, great, you can put up a gate. There are fire code requirements, because that's a fire access road, and you'd have to comply with those fire code requirements in installing your gate. That would be up to them if they wanted to make that application to us. But there are provisions in the fire code to absolutely allow that. What I'm talking about here is with these two parcels, that Tahoe Golf Club Drive goes into Douglas County, and if the parcels it goes through in Douglas County have access easement on them all the way down, then they do have two ways in and out. And it's our belief, in speaking with Danny, that that exists.
Speaking today, is there any reason, emergency access-wise, for us to consider not approving residential there?
On these two parcels,
That is correct.
it's satisfied to the fire department's requirements.
Okay, but if, thinking in the future, I come in there and I'm going to build 500 houses in there,
Well, that
Then-
would be a different story. We approved it based on the zoning requirement before us.
okay.
We didn't evaluate it based on an increased density.
All right, let's say 60 houses in that area, because that's,
Well, it's 5 acres, so the most they could do is
all right,
12.
all right, let's
I
say,
mean, I'm not that good
let's
at
say I'm going to
math.
build one house in there, two houses in there. What are you going to require for emergency access Are you going to require the road through to Douglas County?
Well, it exists. That's what I'm saying. It already exists.
But what happens if they don't have legal access to it?
Well, then it would depend on how many homes they're building and how the egress they used off of Tahoe Golf Club Drive worked. But it's our understanding that it exists.
Okay, but as of today, there's no problem.
No. Good with me?
And so I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate it. And then the planning department is also saying that this is the Tahoe Golf Course Road gives them, and the Highway 50 is the primary, and we have a secondary access to this. Should we vote in favor of this, it meets all the criteria. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Let me ask you this. So can a motion be done today that approves this, but conditions the approval on a statement or a condition that you cannot use Old Clear Creek Road to get to this property?
I don't believe so, no.
And why not? If you can get to this property off Highway 50, and you can get to both parcels off Tahoe Drive, or whatever that thing is, Golf Course Drive. I don't know why I got Tahoe in my brain here.
Me too.
If you can do that, why isn't it possible to say, this property will not have access on Clear Creek Road?
I think, and maybe Randy can help me with this, I just think in general terms, master plan amendments and zone changes are not able to be conditioned, period.
I think that's the right answer, Mayor. You can't put a condition on a zone.
Okay, well, I don't know if it's going to come back before me or this board, but if it gets approved here, I'm going to require that, either the developer come in here and rebuild Clear Creek Road, or that the condition of development is that you can't use Clear Creek Road, period. I mean, that's where I'm going to go with this. Only way I know to get out of the conundrum. Supervisor Shirk,
No, sir.
okay.
Sorry.
Public, anybody want to get into the conundrum? I got you on the trails, man. You're going to have to answer why you need why you can't put trails in as it's quasi-public as opposed to residential. You got to tell me that.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am
Guzman.
Juan Guzman. I am a resident of Douglas County. I am also a member of the Carson Valley Trails Association, and we have been working in, we as in the Carson Valley Trails Association, the state of Nevada, Carson City, when I worked for Carson City, and some other partners, the Nature Conservancy as well, regarding this property. It is our intention, or it has been our intention, meaning in generally that group, and I cannot, as you know, speak for Carson City anymore or suggest anything about Carson City. However, when we went and talked to the state over a period of about 4 years, the last 2 years more intensively, much more intensively, since the trail is done, waiting for a trailhead on this side, on the north side of the trail. We assume that, number one, the state is going to, at some point in time, put those lands for sale. And number two, that it will be a public process, and most likely we will form a coalition to try to purchase those lands out of the private sector. And conserve the lands. Then we will find a buyer for a permanent owner for those lands, either Carson City or the Carson Valley Trails Association or the Nature Conservancy, most likely. The Nature Conservancy, to that effect, wrote a letter to the state about a year ago, telling them that they're willing to purchase the land. However, the state is not able or not willing to sell the land at that time. The state has been very clear. Their interest is to preserve the value of the land. They believe by statute they have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize the value of those lands. They also believe that bringing in a trailhead will devalue those lands. And no matter how much we have talked to them about lands that are favorably affected by trails, we have not been able to convince them that that is the case. About a year ago, we met in Douglas County, and at that time, the apparent solution was that we will try to process a master plan and zoning change that will secure the state a similar designation to the lands adjacent. The people that buy land for open space, as in that case, it was me representing Carson City and the Nature Conservancy doing Petit, understood that what we were saying is it's likely that if we ever want to buy it, we will have to pay more for it. But you know what? That is the system that we work on. This serves two goals. Number one, it preserves the value of the land, supposedly, by the state providing for a way by which that value can be maximized, in their opinion. And number two, then their willingness, and this is just willingness because master plan and change of land uses cannot be conditioned, to work on the trail has been made public. And we were having these discussions with Leon Drosdorf, the director of the agency. So we figured that it carries some weight. But it's just as far as it goes. We understand still the legislature may have to approve this sale, so there are many unknowns. It's every little step at a time. And I won't dare, Mayor, talk about access. I think the board have a very good grasp of the access situation. And as bad as it sounds, it is, accurate. Clear Creek is there, and it is a problem. And our legal, when I was staff, the legal advice was, it's private. So we cannot do anything about it. Not only that, but if we do something about it, then we'll need to maintain it in the long run, and it is a very expensive proposition. So that side aside, what I believe is that this is an incremental step towards the goal of achieving this trail. And I believe that it will be very difficult for Mr. Drofford and the agency not to deal in good faith in negotiating with us in obtaining access. The maintenance of the trailhead was being discussed in relation to voluntarism, the Carson Valley Trails Association. Carson City already have arrangements for the plowing of the road with Douglas County. So we imagine that most of the large questions that can be addressed have been addressed. And you are right, Mr. McKenna, until the time that there's a developer inside, these specific questions
Okay,
are not going to be
Juan, I got
answered.
you. I know we've been kind of, but I just wanted you to answer one question for me. Can you put the trailhead in there with the existing zoning, or do you need to change the zoning in order to get the trailhead in there? Yes, no, indifferent, what?
The answer is yes, we could put the trailhead in there with existing zoning if the state were to be willing to do so.
Okay, so the state willing to do it, the state wants to bump up its ability to make money? Gotcha, okay, all right. Zoning, all right. Anybody else?
He still managed me as if I were his staff. Huh? Thank you very much for
I think we all know where it is. Anybody want to weigh in? Come on up.
Hi, Shonda Purdy. I'm a resident on Old Clear Creek.
Hi.
This is not just a zoning issue with these two properties. It can't be just these two properties. It's a master plan, which means it's more than just these two properties. The problem with the golf course going in Douglas County is Douglas County did the same thing. Oh, we'll just push it off. Someone else will deal with Old Clear Creek. Everybody else will just deal with it. You have to deal with the whole picture, not just these two parcels. You can't just say, this is just zoning these two parcels, because once you open that up, how are you going to deal with the rest of the road? How are you going to deal with the access? I get that fire, great, go down the road, it's an emergency. When we have gates up, how is that going to happen? Where's the protection? Where is the dealing with Old Clear Creek Road?
Gotcha. Said it. Okay. Anybody else?
My name is Karen Mullen, and I don't live in Carson City, but I recreate in Carson City. So I just wanted to make a comment as a private citizen, and that is that I think there might be a solution. I understand the issue is that during zoning, you can't put any conditions on it, but maybe there's a little bit of trust here with the state, and even though they're maximizing the sale of the property through upzoning, I would hope that there would be a way to work out where the parcel is. Now you're going to 5-acre parcels that you need for a trailhead before they put it up for sale, and ask to enter into an agreement after the upzoning and find out where that parcel is going to be from your recreation open space staff, and actually have it parcel mapped prior to the sale of the property so that it's clear where and what it is that the city wants to do in the future and where that access and linkage will be. And that would be my comment, just purely from a recreation standpoint.
Okay. Thank you very much, Karen. All right. Anybody else? All right, we're going to beat it around quite a bit, so let's bring it back here and we'll discuss and see what we want to do. You want to try a motion? You want to talk? Try. Huh? Try a motion. Try a motion. Let's go. Yeah, go for it.
I move to deny a master plan amendment to change the land use designation of property located south of Highway 50 West at Lake Tahoe Golf Course Drive, APN 007-031-34, 35, and 007-051-85 and 86 from public, quasi-public to rural residential based on the findings contained, strike that last part, just end it at public, quasi-public to rural residential.
Motion.
Oh, I'll second it for discussion purposes.
You really don't have to do that, you know? But go ahead, all right.
I had discussion.
Discussion, go.
First, Susan, what's the current master plan designation of the land?
Public, quasi-public. And it is kind of
So-
an island of public, quasi-public in between conservation reserve and residential.
So, okay, so the current master plan designation is for what it actually is today. So this, because a lot of times what the zoning is different from what the master plan designation would be, so we're not, okay, I got that. Again, I think that we've all brought up a lot of issues today that really can only be addressed when a project is brought forward to us, and I'm pretty adamant that we need to deal with these problems, and the only way we can do with that is when we can actually address those issues. And so I just don't feel that this is the appropriate time to make the master plan amendment and zoning changes. As to the argument that the adjacent property is zoned rural residential, you know, every zoning district has a boundary, so I just don't think that that's a valid argument. There's always going to be a cutoff on zoning. And I think that all we're doing, we're taking a problem property and we're adding to the cost to develop that property down the road for a developer. So in my mind, not only are we allowing a problem to be created, we're also making that problem, we're exacerbating that problem by increasing the cost to develop it down the road.
Could I ask the state a question? Could I call them back up and just ask? Is that all right?
I mean, we're kind of on discussion, but we'll try.
It's a real quick question. I mean, if they don't get the rezoning, what is their intention to do with the property then?
The state has, it's on our disposal list. So at some point, we will move towards disposal.
Thank you. And Susan, I have one additional question. If they're denied, if we deny this master plan change, is there a legal recourse the applicant or any applicants could take by not giving what is normally, I know we're the applicant, but could the state come back and take a legal recourse because they're not getting the rezoning as other individuals have?
I'm going to defer to Randy on that because since Carson City's the applicant, I'm not certain how that would work for the state as the property owner.
He's going to
Maybe
tell
he
you
can
it's a discretionary act.
And, I mean, you've built a record that there's sufficient concerns with the consequences of zoning that it's defendable.
Thank you.
You know, for me, like I said, I'm conflicted. I'd kind of like to vote for this motion, but I think at the end of the day, you know, if there's indeed a secondary access off of Tahoe, Lake Tahoe Golf Course Drive, that the fire chief said there is, okay, but I want it on the record. If I don't know where this motion's going to go, but you know, I want it in the minutes and the record that, you know, further development, it's not going to be a city responsibility that Clear Creek Road get fixed. I mean, this has got to be either the people that live on that road that own part of it, or the developer wants to come in and develop these pieces of property. And I want it in the record that that's a condition that, you know, if you come in here, don't come in and try and develop this property saying our secondary access or our primary access is Clear Creek Drive. Ain't gonna fly, at least with me. So if it comes in while I'm here, that's what I'd like in the minutes to reflect. Not gonna happen. I mean, because I don't want to exacerbate a problem. And so to me, even though if I can live with that condition, I can live with rezoning it, because there is a secondary fire access on the piece of property. So I intend to vote no on this one, but if it comes back around on the affirmative side, I'm going to make that statement a part of the record. Okay. All right. So further discussion on the motion. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
Nay. Okay. Passes 3-2. Don't need to do. All right. So now do we have to do C? No.
No.
No. All right. Okay, so that'll come back at some point in time in our life, maybe? All right. Take up city manager.
Mr. Mayor, we have a couple appointments to the 911 Advisory Committee. I believe Stacy is here if you have any questions about it. The two individuals who were nominating are not currently in the room.
We got two individuals in two spots, right?
Well, we have two individuals in three spots. We have three vacancies. We only received two applications, but because we redesigned the ordinance last year to have a floating number between 5 and 7, this will give us 5. And so we don't need to take any more action. We'll try after the first of the year, and we'll open it again and see if we can fill that one more position. The two people who we're looking at are both communications operators, and both work overnights right now, so that's the reason they're not here. But they've been on the board, and they're just seeking reappointment.
All right.
You interviewed them about a year ago.
Anybody have any difficulty with that?
I'll make a motion.
Motion's in order.
I move to appoint Denise Stewart and Wendy Talavera to the 911 Surcharge Advisory Committee, each for a term that will expire on December 31st, 2016.
On the motion, all in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Okay. All right. Let's take up item 22, the efficiency study. Do you need time, Mark? You all set up? As long as you didn't take a donut, you're all right.
You can have a donut.
I thought about it.
You can have a donut, too. That's all right. Come on.
All set?
All set.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, other members of the Board of Supervisors. For the record, Mark Starenka and Colleen Rosillas from Moss Adams, your internal auditors. It's a pleasure to be here, as it always is, and to share with you the results of the employee efficiency study. You should have that report in your packet. We've prepared a brief presentation to walk you through the highlights. I'm going to give you sort of the high points, some of the things I would hope would be your takeaways, and then Colleen's going to take you through a summary of some of the key points of the report. So just as a reminder, titled an employee efficiency study, we had some discussion about this when you were considering whether to move forward with the project in terms of what the scope, kind of the nature of it was going to be. And one of the things that we talked about was certainly we can look at employee efficiency, look at things like organizational structure, staffing level, efficiency from the standpoint of use of technology, general process, but what this is not is a level of service study. So it's not, we're at this current level of service, which requires X staffing level, and if we were to change that staffing level, how would it change the level of service? Because it's just a lot bigger undertaking to do. Although, as we went through the process, we of course try to understand to some extent service level, and so in a way kind of talking out of, sort of both sides of my mouth, but not going to that level of detail. And so it's reasonably high level, but you'll see where we tried to delve down. So this was all departments reporting to the city manager, plus the assessor, clerk recorder, library, sheriff's office, and treasurer, and thanks to all of you for participating. Just a couple comments about methodology. So like we do all of these types of studies, we talk to key people from each of the departments, get an understanding from their perspective of how things are working, how things could be better. Of course, focused on efficiency, also looking at effectiveness. And one of the things that you had asked us, and I think Supervisor about, was as you go through this, will we be looking for other things? And we said, yes, we'll be holistic. And so we have not only a staffing analysis, but as you saw for the report, a number of findings, recommendations relative to what I would call efficiency and effectiveness improvement opportunities. So while we're there, we're going to gather as much and share as much as we can for the benefit of the city. And last comment is, and so we shared our findings, recommendations, city manager's office, the management team, and that's for the purpose of validating facts, make sure we've got the information right, and testing the practicality of recommendations. Are we off in left field, or we have something to say that seems reasonable for the basis and benefit of the city? This is just a recap. So 15 departments in total represented and participated in the project. Of course, as we went through the process, lots of good things happening. We mentioned a few here. Your internal finance committee, which is a great example of a cross-functional activity within the city, which I think has served the city very well, especially in the down economic times, and how to make good decisions across the city under those conditions. We've got great things going on in health and human resources, human services, thank you, the sheriff's office, the assessor's office in terms of working with other jurisdictions, leveraging your resources, keeping them busy. That's great. Actually, one thing that's not here that I thought would be germane to share with you at our last audit committee, which I guess was this December, November, Public Works and the Fleet Group presented their implementation plan and an update of what they've been doing in response to the fleet efficiency and utilization studies. And I know that we were very impressed with the progress that the city has made. So they'd hired a fleet manager, they had purchased software, that those two things were sort of priorities 1 and 2 of what the city needs to do to be able to tackle a lot of the recommendations that we had provided relative to fleet services. And so city was clearly making strong progress. That was fantastic. That was how you want this process overall to work, that we're identifying things that are beneficial to the city, and they were clearly making progress. And so that's a great example of accommodation of how things work well. So conclusions. So this is kind of the bottom line, and I'll go a little bit slowly here, and you certainly can fire away questions when I finish, because then I'm going to turn it over to Colleen to talk about citywide results and then department by department results. So first thing to note is, so there was, as everyone knows, quite a reduction in workforce from the peak prior to the economic downturn to today, so about 12%. You'll see in our analysis that we're comparing to 08 and 09 instead of 06, 07. Colleen will explain the rationale from that, and it'll make sense to you when we go through that. I'm trying not to steal your thunder. So, the second comment is overall staffing is reasonable. We looked at the city at a macro level. We did look at it at a department by department level. We looked at groups within departments, looking for, do things seem within reason, comparing you based on our experience to lots of other entities and how they staff and provide services and tackle services. So the overall very confident statement is staffing is reasonable. And then I'll drill down a little bit. So if we look at sort of an industry best practice as a rule of thumb is a span of control of 1 to 5 to 1 to 7, that range. You're going to see lots of examples in public and private organizations below that and above that, and it very appropriately is going to vary by type of function. So for example, in a city manager's office, excluding all the department heads, you might have a very small span of control, or in a very specialized activity within a city, like in this case, transportation, you may have a very small group, and so you might have a span of control of 1 to 3 or 1 to 2. And in other cases, in places like water and wastewater, where you have a lot of field crew, you'll see spans of control of 1 to 10, 1 to 15, 1 to 20. So you're going to have a range, but you kind of look for an overall, are we in sort of this range of 1 to 5 to 1 to 7 as a benchmark, as a ballpark. And so we'll see here that in the manager and supervisor to staff, so sort of that middle layer to the staff layer, it's about 1 to 3.8. So that's in that, to that benchmark and context, you know, on a low. And so why is it low? And we think it's low for good reason, and the reasons are as follows. So one is, you're first setting aside that you're also a county, you're a small city, just in the context of being a city, and you're going to have the limitations of you have to provide the services that you do. There's only so many resources that you need to do it, and so you're going to, by definition or by necessity, tend to have small groups here and there within the city. You compound that with that you're an integrated city-county, so you now provide more services than cities do. And so that exacerbates that situation, because now we're truly what we would call sort of a full-service local government in a very small community, relatively speaking. And so you're going to tend to have these pockets of small groups. It's just how it goes. And you don't suddenly hire a bunch more people to make that span of control look better, right? And so that sort of, it is what it is. You're also going to have, in cases, whether you're small or large, specialized groups. Transportation would be one. Water meters would be one. Public works is where you have lots of different services. It's going to tend to be places where you see both the largest spans of control and the smallest spans of control. And so those are the things that drive that ratio being low, and we think it's reasonable. We don't think that that's out of the norm. We did, as a check for us, do some comparisons to other cities and counties of what we would think are similar nature, just to see if we're missing something sort of from our perspective. And we found that to support what I'm telling you, which is that those ratios are reasonable. You're not way out of the norm of other organizations. But that's not to say there aren't some pockets of opportunity where we think there are efficiency opportunities in terms of staffing. And so we identified 4 here. One is, we said in the city manager's office, it doesn't have to be there, but it's a logical place to be. And we're suggesting, recommending that you actually add a small administrative and analytical pool of resources, and I use the word pool purposely, as a group of resources that can support the city as a whole. And the reason we are suggesting that it is sort of twofold. One is your staff reductions back due to the economic conditions were largely, not exclusively, but largely, from what we can tell, at the administrative level. And so that was depleted. And that's not necessarily a right or a wrong thing. It's just where the staffing changes tended to happen. What we did find in talking to the departments in terms of efficiency is that you have higher level people, managers, directors, doing things that are more administrative in nature. And so they kind of run askew from the sort of the test that we sort of try to apply is, are people operating at their highest and best use? Are they doing the things that they're most capable of doing, that their job descriptions most direct them to be doing, or are they being sucked into doing other lower level, things that aren't their highest and best use. And we found plenty of examples of that. And so this type of resourcing strategy would help with that. We're suggesting it as a pool to give it flexibility to support other departments by design, so that it's not just supporting any one department. And I think that would serve the city quite well. Sure.
Mark, I guess my question on that when I read it, and I asked the city manager about this too, different departments have different functions, policies, procedures, all the rest of that. How do you develop a pool that's so flexible such that it can, cross the gamut to pick up the slack, even if it is lower level functions?
A great question. We actually have this isn't necessarily the answer, but anecdotally, we have a number of cities that we work with that are moving more towards that model, in part as a result of the economic downturn, because what they found was that those resources within departments, after the downturn, some still had, some don't have any, and they're not tapping those resources in a flexible way. If the mayor needs help from you and you're different departments, and you're like, well, I can't help you, you're not in my department. Okay, well, that's not the type of activity we want to be able to see. And so at an administrative and analytical level, what you're talking about are functions and activities that are common across departments. Yes, you're going to have different policies and procedures, but how you prepare a report, how you analyze data, how you do things like support the city manager is hoping to institute a lean program across the city. A resource like that could support, from an analytical standpoint, a lean program by collecting, analyzing data that's going to cut across departments. So there's lots of things that those resources could do. The same way if your staffing was different, another way of looking at that would be saying, well, just like the example I was using for the two of you, we'd say, well, if you have some availability and the mayor's department has some need, he should be able to tap your resources. That doesn't necessarily have to be a pool. That's just sharing. That's just, I'm providing backup. That's another way of doing that. But instead of putting resources within individual departments and saying share them, we're saying just purposely create a small pool with the design to use them flexibly across the city. And it's sort of doing it more proactively and more intentionally. I hope that's responsive.
Mark, did you look at the relationship between our marathon contract and the creation of an admin pool? Because what I'm getting at is, don't we have the ability now to provide those admin positions through our marathon contract? Or did you look at that, or is there a conflict there, or an inefficiency there?
Yeah. So number one, I don't think there's not a conflict, I don't believe. Yes, you can do that today. I guess what we're suggesting, and you talking about the use of temporary resources? Yeah. And there's areas within the city where the city leverages temporary resources quite heavily, like in parks and recreation and seasonal resources, very appropriately, and even volunteer resources like the sheriff's department does, which is great and saves costs. What we're saying is, I think that there's enough demand to create permanent positions, to create a pool that way. And instead of, you're inevitably going to start to staff back up over time, whatever that looks like. And what we're trying to say is do that in the most flexible, most efficient way possible in terms of admin and analytical resources, in a design that allows them to be shared, versus that happening department by department and becoming a piecemeal approach. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Mark, is there a reason why you say that the city is going to staff back up?
No, I knew I was going to regret using those words.
Because
theoretically, over time, you'll...
Well, but that's not where industry's going. That's not where the city can go. It needs to probably even reduce staff, so...
Point well taken. How about that?
Mark, when you ran your numbers on your
Staffing ratio?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
did you incorporate the volunteers and staffing outside of the city that from?
No, and that's a great question and an important point, for example, in Parks and Recreation, which is a good example of that. So no, that doesn't, and that's, actually, I should have mentioned that as another contributing factor to having small ratios in some cases, because actually those ratios are a lot bigger at particular times in the year when you're using seasonal and part-time. Although, in fairness, other municipalities do the same things. But no, we did not include those in the ratios.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Last couple comments on this point, and of course, keep the questions coming. So in purchasing, that's one area that we think is clearly under-resourced. You are very common to other municipalities in this regard, where purchasing is a challenge. It's a function that does tend to be typically under-resourced from our experience. It's a function that tends to be, by necessity, fairly decentralized, and that makes it a function that tends to be higher risk, one, in just the nature of the activity, because you're purchasing and contracting, but two, when you have decentralization of that and you have variation in it, that you're, A, in a reactive mode when you're under-resourced, but B, you have a lot of variety of how things are done across the organization. And that doesn't tend, from a risk standpoint, to be a good thing or an efficient thing. And so we could really recommend and see the need for an additional coordinator in that function. And the city would be well served to have that additional resource. And then the other two comments are similar. In the information technology department and in the library, we're not talking about staffing count change there, just a staffing mix change. In both cases, they're higher resourced at a manager level than probably they need to be, and under-resourced at a staff or technical level than they need to be. I'll let them both certainly answer for themselves if you ask questions. I believe there's concurrence in the viewpoint of what I'm conveying in this regard. And so those, as we've described them, as reconfiguring what that resource mix looks like within those departments. And then the final comment, as you see in the report, then we have a number of findings and recommendations that are associated with a wide range of opportunities, we believe, to enhance efficiency and or effectiveness within the various functions at a citywide level or departmental level.
Mark, Supervisor McKenna had an unavoidable conflict this morning, and I tried to promise him that I would get done by 11:30. He has to leave, so I don't want you to think that he's not interested in what you're doing. So.
I rest assured that he's interested. Thank you, though.
Done at 11:30?
Yeah, we're done at 11:30. Sorry. Okay.
Shall I hand over to Colleen and we keep going? Okay, great.
Good morning.
I'm sorry, Mark. I'm labor on my one quick question.
Sure.
On Marathon, how many, the number of employees we get from Marathon, do you know that number that we don't?
I know it varies greatly over the course of the year. I don't know if anyone from the city.
Because that really fluctuates the number that you're quoting here. The management to, staff, employees, those numbers, it varies. I'm sorry, it's not part of the discussion, so I'm having some issue with not incorporating the employees coming out of Marathon into this report, because it's leaving out a significant number of employees that managers oversee, especially in Parks and Recs, which we keep citing. So those numbers are skewed.
Sure. So there was a specific reason why they weren't included. Many seasonal and part-time employees are not accounted for as bodies. They're accounted for as a budget that you can draw upon in order to fill a need at certain times of year. And so those specific counts weren't necessarily available, or it wasn't defensible to convert those numbers into an FTE body. So figure out, it wasn't possible to determine the total number of hours per department or divide that by 2080 to get to an FTE count. So we didn't want to present information that wasn't correct, and we didn't want to present any skewed data. So there are definitely places where the departments could talk about where their spans of control increased significantly. A great example of that, again, is in Parks and Recreation with the recreation supervisors. So they're potentially overseeing, dozens of folks who are teaching classes or providing support to the city, and it's difficult to say that that's the same thing as a manager in public works and transportation planning overseeing a specific number of transportation planners. It's very different. So we wanted to make this as apples to apples as possible.
And the other two comments I would just make for whatever they're worth. One is, it's kind of a industry standard to do the analysis the way we did in terms of factoring those positions out. And that's sort of neither here nor there. But more importantly is, our findings and recommendations take into account that they do exist, that they do have a role within the city, and what I would hope is that your takeaway would be, if we were making a finding or recommendation by excluding them, that should be a concern, but we're not making findings or recommendations that exclude them. We're acknowledging them. We just didn't include them in the overall analysis for the reasons Colleen mentioned.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, so the first thing we wanted to bring up is we're showing staff counts per department and citywide starting at fiscal year 08-09. The peak staffing for the city was fiscal year 06-07. There was an initial significant buyout that happened around 2007, 2008. Unfortunately, we weren't able to find detailed data on staffing levels at that time because of the way that the city did its budgeting. So when Nick arrived, the city switched to GFOA budgeting, and so there was significant detail on staffing that we were able to draw upon. So using 08-09 numbers reflects about halfway through the staffing decrease that the city went through. It was the middle of the cuts, and so what you see here are about 30 FTEs that were eliminated during that time. So the first sets of buyouts were folks who were eligible for retirement or close to retirement. Those were a different type of buyouts or layoffs than we necessarily looked at in this second round. This was primarily folks who were in administrative positions or lower level staff positions. This round of cuts, frankly, were the harder cuts to make, and these were the cuts that had a more significant impact on what the day-to-day business of the city has been over time.
And I would just add, just sharing the numbers in contrast in terms of years, that isn't a basis for findings or recommendations. It's just to give you a point of reference because it's a natural question and just to see what the trend has been.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we're looking at the way staffing levels have changed here in the past 5 years. You can see that the cuts were primarily made at that staff level. Again, it was mostly admin folks, and the departments that were most significantly impacted were Public Works, Fire, and Parks and Recreation. The fact that Carson City is an integrated city-county means that you've got more departments that you're essentially required to have than other counties and cities. And the impact of that is that you're going to have more managers and supervisors because you have mandated services or services that you choose to provide. So the impact of that is that you're just going to have more managers. We're not necessarily saying you should have more staff in those functions. It wouldn't make more sense, I'm going to go to the next slide, to increase your staffing ratio, for example, in the assessor's office by having a lot more assessors just to increase that staffing ratio. You're adequately staffed for the type of work that you provide, understanding that you're a small municipality, but you have to cover all of these services.
Despite what your assessor has to say. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Although he might have a comment or two about additional resources.
Maybe that wasn't a great example. It's an example of a mandated service, right? So go ahead. So Mark discussed a couple of these. Just a few highlights here. Something that was brought up earlier in the meeting in terms of public works and deferred maintenance and transportation, there is a really significant need to allocate some resources and city time to looking at the maintenance backlog and how the understaffing over the course of the last 8 to 10 years has impacted how we do business and how we can accomplish our goals and meet service levels. So that, we do have a full finding about that, but just again reiterating that understaffing has impacted the ability to address deferred maintenance, and that is going to have an impact on how we do business going forward.
And just the flip side of that is, if and when you have more dollars to address deferred maintenance needs, you likely will need more resources in order to be able to accomplish them, right? Because you're staffed pretty leanly in that regard, and your Public Works Director was in a way kind of addressing that earlier in terms of transportation funding.
Good thing McKenna left.
What's that?
I'm being facetious. Go ahead.
That's okay. We appreciate that.
So just quickly covering the others, during the recession, the IFC began approving all positions when they were vacated, regardless of whether they were budgeted. And as the position of the city has recovered, there's probably not a need for every budgeted position that's already gone through finance, already gone through you, to be reassessed by the IFC. So there's an opportunity for us to step back and fill our needs quicker.
Colleen, just a quick question then. What's the downside to IFC doing that other than the time involved?
It's really the time involved. So being able to fill those needs quickly.
And it was a great methodology in terms of that time. So we're as a team across the city, staying connected, not making decisions in isolation, exactly what you would want. In that particular regard, in terms of what an IFC role, it's probably not something that's necessary now. In an example of a small efficiency gain you could have in terms of the process it takes to fill a position. But the overall IFC concept is still great.
This next one you might not like us very much for saying. Carson City has a lot of boards, commissions, and committees. Compared to counties of other size, you've got 21. Most of your peers have around 15. So the impact of that is really that it makes a lot of work for the responding departments, but particularly for the city attorney, the city clerk, and the city manager's office for coordinating all of those meetings. So we would just suggest, since staffing is low and folks are already stretched, really evaluate what the staff impact of those boards, committees, and commissions are when proposing to form a new one or to have a special meeting.
I was going to say that's our classic role of playing the bad guy. And
Would you see combining some of those committees, combining functions?
That would be a great way to help streamline on the staff support side, yes.
Okay, thank you.
But to be, I mean, it's a great idea conceptually, but to be fair, they don't necessarily, on the face of it, lend themselves to being combined. You need to be able to look at each one and see where that made sense, right? But yes, yeah.
And you are, compared to other municipalities, municipalities in Nevada are particularly constrained by the requirements of your open meetings law, which is probably the most strict of all across the country. So just making sure that we keep that in mind as well.
Is there an impact, because we are a consolidated city, county, on the number of boards and commissions that we have? I mean, did you take a look at that, and does that explain some of them? If you compare us to, say, Sparks, Washoe County, and combine them, does that differentiate the par value?
So the answer to that is that as a consolidated municipality, when you consolidated, you chose to provide more service. And compared to the counties that are your size in Nevada, no other county that's your size in Nevada even has a city. Douglas County has census designated places, but it doesn't have a city. So your residents and your businesses and your visitors are looking at a more urbanized and higher level of service than those more rural counties. So that's part of the deal of being consolidated and being more urbanized, when you're serving a much smaller area, and it's just a different type of clientele. So that also could play a part in the number of committees and commissions that you have, because folks might want to be more involved than a typical rural county resident that would have the same population size.
And the point here really just is they do take a lot of time from staff. Or, I mean, just by their nature, and it varies, right, from committee to committee and chair to chair of those committees. But it's kind of just saying, putting it on the table, let's just recognize that that is a time and resource drain on staffing. And just as we go forward, it might just be, as we might consider a future additional committee, let's think carefully about it, because it does have an impact.
I just think it's interesting, if you look at Carson City, we have the highest voting percentage in the state. We have the highest number of boards and commissions. To me, both of those things indicate that our populace wants to be involved, and I don't know that that's a bad thing.
No, that's a good thing. It is. I mean, you might not every day feel like it's a good thing, but it is in general a good. It is, and you want to encourage that. So you don't want to do things that are going to take away from that. So I would concur. Yeah.
Okay, so last two, these are related in that the city needs to leverage the IFC in its technology governance role to provide more standardization, strategic investments in technology so that we can become more efficient and effective. Part of that is developing an IT strategic plan. One of the biggest needs that we saw across departments was document management, knowledge management. A lot of work here is still done on paper, and then it's filed, and then eventually it's destroyed, and we're not retaining that knowledge in a way that's easily searchable or findable. We need to become more efficient and effective through the use of technology. Okay, so as Mark mentioned, we had two departments where we would say management is at a higher level than it needs to be. The first is the IT department. I believe that that is on your agenda as a later item, so shouldn't come as a surprise. Since 2008, 2009, staffing has stayed the same, but you can see that the number of managers has increased. The workload for IT, because technology use has also increased quite a bit across the city, has increased. And so the need is really for staff level folks who can provide direct support. So we would recommend restructuring the department, and I think that's coming up, so. Same thing in the library, hiring a lot more managers and supervisors and having fewer folks at the staff level. So a couple of impacts to that. Folks at the manager level have master's degrees, and so they're going to be paid more. They provide a higher, more specialized level of service. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but administrative needs, financial analysis needs are not being met. And so being able to provide effective customer service while meeting the needs to run the business of the library effectively is more important than having those highly specialized folks in management positions.
And I would just mention that we might have had this conversation a few months ago, and this is just a conceptual comment, not a definitive comment about your resources. Over time, what can happen within organizations, which could explain, some of these situations, is that as you want to retain employees and their tenure, continues over time, you're trying to find ways to pay them more. And so sometimes paying them more becomes, you go from a senior technical role to a supervisor or managerial role. And that next step is just the only way to pay them more because they're at the top end of a wage range. And so sometimes we get sort of span of control reduction and creep in more managers in a way almost out of necessity. And that's not a bad thing, because sometimes you just have to do that to make do, and it will make numbers look more skewed, and that's why you don't want to be sort of too beholden to the numbers. You really need to look behind them, which is what we try to do. So that could have been the case in some of these instances, but that's just kind of food for thought that can tend to happen over time.
Can I just ask a question? Sure. In the case of the library, how do they deal with that? I mean, do you demote people in terms of pay? How do you deal with this once it's in place?
Would you like to ask us, or would you like to ask the library director? That's me trying to pass the buck. Yeah.
Stina Lloyd, Library Director for the record. We have looked at a couple different ways. I mean, I saw the draft maybe about a week and a half ago, and this is going to our library board this evening to see if they have any input on how this may be addressed as well. Is that okay?
Thanks for bailing me out. Okay.
Okay, so as Mark mentioned, we found opportunities for increasing efficiency within departments. Every department has at least one finding. I'm just going to hit on the highlights here. The first is that the city doesn't have a communications or public information role. You're lucky that you have a good relationship with the press, but there isn't a policy for what happens when the media calls and what do you do? Well, we have some clients who really have terrible relationships, so we, from our perspective, you guys have great relationship. So we recommend assigning a public information officer role, getting folks trained up on a policy, and really having a protocol for dealing with the media. It's important to get out in front of the story and communicate your progress and communicate what we're doing effectively before anyone kind of pokes around and starts asking questions about the bad things. The story wants to be about what we're doing well. And so this is an important role. And we think that this can be assigned to an existing position.
And actually, I was going to go back just to the first bullet because it's a good example of what I would consider highest and best use. So you have a GIS analyst within the assessor's office, very specialized, very leverageable in terms of a resource for the city as a whole, but who, by virtue of not having, I'll say, adequate administrative type resources, is doing things that's not the highest and best use of those GIS skill sets. And so here's a great opportunity for, if you had a pool of resources within the city manager's office, for example, of administrative and analytical resources, they could be doing some of those administrative tasks, and the GIS analysts could be freed up to do more GIS activity. And then you have people working, at each of their highest and best use. And so even though that's, just one item, it's a great example of how you can better leverage resources.
Second one on this slide that we wanted to highlight is that business development, economic development is of increasing importance in Carson City. It's a key initiative for the city manager. We recommend that the business development manager and the half-time management assistant are moved to the city manager's office to report directly and really support economic development in Carson City. That's a common arrangement in other municipalities. That's the way it was before the recession here. It was moved over to community development. Not necessarily a bad arrangement. It's just to highlight the importance and really elevate the importance of economic development here. Let's see. As Mark discussed, purchasing is really important. You'll see in a couple of different places in our report, we recommend primarily in the maintenance and customer service functions that as resources become available, we need to strategically allocate resources to meet increasing workloads. One of those places is in the fire department. And the fire department, again, is a great example of folks at the management level doing a lot of administrative work because those positions were cut. So being able to meet more customer needs, meet response times more effectively by assigning resources where they really need to go.
Does that take into account their shared response across county lines and that sort of thing? Did you consider that in your assessment?
Sure. So we did look at that, yeah. And the fire department's, the calls, we actually went through pretty in detail what the calls for service were and what the workload is. And it has been increasing over time.
You take into account that the fire chief has a boat at Lake Tahoe? I'm sorry. We need to go ahead.
We were going to recommend surplusing any planes, trains, or boats.
All right. Go ahead.
Another future issue that we want to look up, and we wouldn't recommend that the city look into this for 1 to 2 years, but is the impact of the Affordable Care Act on how business is done in Health and Human Services, and what the role of a public health department is and where the funding comes from is really significantly changing. So we weren't prepared to make recommendations at this point about that, but there are going to be policy decisions that they'll come to you to make as things change and as the full fallout from the ACA is realized. It may take quite a bit of time, but it's something to really start thinking about is how are we structured and what type of services do we offer? So a couple of human resources issues, really common across governments is that training was the first thing to go during the recession. There weren't funds to provide training. We provide all the required training that is required by state and federal statutes. Some departments also provide training because they have folks who need certifications. But there's an opportunity to find low or no cost training, provide leadership training to management and supervisors so that we have less risk when we're managing our employees, but we're also developing folks more. Really look at opportunities across the city to perhaps leverage our internal resources and our subject matter experts to help develop our employees, keep them happy, get them more effective and efficient. Second is that the workforce is aging, again, really common in government, and we need to look at succession planning. When we have folks retire, we lose a lot of knowledge. This goes back a little bit to the technology solutions that we talked about before. But we need a citywide succession planning strategy. Folks in subject matter expert and management positions need to have identified succession plans and that knowledge documented so that we don't lose it when they walk out the door. Again, a couple of areas where we have a need for additional resources based on workload. That's in Parks and Recreation, in maintenance, and in Public Works in the permitting area. The Sheriff's Office also has some staffing deficiencies associated with administrative positions that don't have a lot of backup, as well as being able to meet minimum staffing requirements without incurring too much overtime. I think we can open it up for questions.
Very good. Questions of the board? Anybody? Public comments? I don't hear any. Okay, anything you guys, I want to say thank you for taking a look at all these things. And I'm sure that we're going to be digesting it as we go forward. I know you didn't hit on it all. We've all had a copy of the report.
But, what I would maybe offer, Mr. Mayor, is that in terms of our findings and recommendations, I think a lot of these are great inputs for the city manager. We've had discussions about them in terms of things that he wants to accomplish on behalf of the city. So we're sort of paving the way a little bit or starting the dialogue in some of these areas, some of which are absolutely not new to him, and maybe some that are a little bit. But I think there's a lot here that the city manager's office can be focused on over the next few years in terms of tweaking and refining. And I do think one of Colleen's last points was just in terms of succession planning. This is not just a public sector issue. We have an accelerating aging workforce, and in organizations where we don't have a high level of policy, procedure, process documentation, don't have a high leverage of technology, which tends to automate and help with documenting those things, that as we lose key people, especially when they've been here for a good tenure, a lot of that knowledge goes out the door, and that's going to be an increasingly significant challenge for Carson City, as it is for many other organizations, public and private. And so I think that's an area, just sort of in general, that has various elements that support it to be focused on in the next few years, because again, it's going to be an increasing challenge.
Good. A couple comments, and we'll see if we can take a motion here. Supervisor Shirk.
Well, I know before we get to the motion, reading what's recommended for the action, it says, and direct staff to bring back an implementation plan based upon the board of supervisors discussion. Well, part of my discussion would be, we paid $52,000 for this study. we have 27 recommendations to various departments. And what I'd like to see in my discussion and my recommendation is, I mean, if we have recommendations made to the sheriff's department, as an example, or the treasurer, are they going to come back to us with their recommendations of how they're going to, or the findings on their recommendations, how they're going to reevaluate this, how they're going to improve the services for their department based upon your findings? Will they individually come back to us, or how would they come back to us? Where is this going to go? We spent $52,000. I'd like to know the next step rather than just say we accept this. I'd like to know the follow-through steps of how we're going to proceed forward on all of these recommendations in some fashion.
Well, I can address part of that. As Mark alluded, this has been up to this point really an iterative process between city staff to include the electeds and Moss Adams. Many of these recommendations, we're already leaning pretty far forward into. The next agenda item, for example, is the IT staffing reorganization. So certainly from city staff perspective, I look forward to implementing these recommendations. Part of that will be to bring back to you a schedule. I know in my, in the interview process before I was hired, some of the previous Moss Adams studies have been brought up, and implementation was a key concern to you. So I want you to know that we're leaning forward into this. Certainly for the elected officials, I'll be happy to coordinate responses as they move along as well. Some of these may or may not, for example, one of the recommendations for the sheriff department was to hire civilian corrections officers as, as the city budget picture improves. Okay, that's actually a condition-based, not a time-based recommendation. So those are going to have to be handled in that way. But certainly from the city staff point of view, we're leaning forward into this. This has been, for the department directors and for myself, it's been a welcome process, and I think you're going to be happy with the results as we step through them. Not to speak for the sheriff or the other electeds here.
Well, as we move forward with this, then would each department come back to us, or will this all come from your department, how the recommendations made from Moss Adams to individual departments? Would we have an update to where we're moving forward or how we're moving forward with their recommendation from you personally, or will it come from department heads, not the elected officials?
I think in most cases, I'll probably bring that to you and summarize where we are with it. I'm sure for some that are more complex, we'll probably have the department director come up and brief, his or her implementation. But I would expect for most of them, I'll be providing a summary to you, if that suffices.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Thank you, and I apologize. One of the recommendations was, from my department, was the GIS analyst. Now, there are certain issues with this particular position, because when the GIS department was transferred down to Douglas County, I asked to be involved in the negotiations of all of this, because I have maps that are required by law to be completed, and there's certain steps that have to be done. So I was told I was going to be included in the process, but then one day, I was just pretty much told that this GIS analyst was going to be coming to my department because the GIS department was moving to Douglas County. We didn't have enough work for this particular person to do, and so that's why we contracted with Lander County to do Lander County's maps as well. So there's certain issues which I don't have any control over. So I'm not sure how this recommendation is going to be fixed, or I'm going to be able to fix it when I have no control over it. And so there's certain issues with this that, I mean, they're unique, they're special, and they need to be addressed separately. So, thank you.
Nick, Can I assume that large parts of this report will be revisited during our strategic planning session next month?
I think that's not only an excellent point, but an excellent idea.
It can be reviewed there, but it also has to come back to the board too, all of these recommendations. We can have it part of that meeting, that's strategic planning, but it still has to come back to this board. These recommendations and the findings and how we're moving forward, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I see this as a work in progress over time, where, you know, you're not going to see everybody come at one time and say, this is the answer to all these. I think what you're going to see, at least from my perspective, is, you know, this kind of is a roadmap of, you know, where we think we ought to be going and going down that road. And I think that, you know, periodically or one time, a couple times, city managers should come in and brief us on where we are with standing these. But I personally don't think that we ought to be having another, it wouldn't be my intention anyway to have, you know, a complete report on every one of these every time, because I think it's a work in progress and it's a good roadmap. And I think that, you know, the city manager's got his own theory about how to do some staffing and management levels, and I think we're going to start seeing that. And so, you know, anyway, that's how I kind of see this. So, looking down the road. All right, we want to. Sure, comment.
Just another question for you, Nick. Is there a time frame that we could include in a motion that you would be comfortable with to bring back an implementation plan, or would your preference to be to do this piecemeal, which I think the mayor just referenced?
No, I'd be perfectly comfortable with either. If you would direct me to come back with a specific implementation plan at a certain board meeting in the future, I'll be happy to do that. If you want me to come back over the course of the next, 12, 18, 24 months to give quarterly updates or something along those lines, I'll be happy to do it that way. As I said, we're already leaning forward into a lot of these recommendations. This has not been the first time the department directors have seen or considered some of these recommendations.
All right.
Nick, would you be comfortable with quarterly updates and implementation benchmarks?
Yes, I would.
It's fine with me. Sometimes, yeah, it's fine with me. Not that it has to be fine with me, but it's fine with me. How's that? All right.
That's fine with me then.
All right, we'll take a motion. Supervisor Abott, go.
Okay. I move to accept the employee efficiency study as presented by Moss Adams and direct staff to bring back an implementation plan and/or quarterly updates based on Board of Supervisors discussion.
Second.
Motion.
Did public comment?
Didn't I take public comment already? I think I did. I asked anybody to weigh in earlier before the motion.
Did I miss it?
Huh?
Did I miss it? I must have missed it. Forgive me, sir.
I think you're getting long in the tooth.
That's right.
Lon. I think you're getting long in the tooth. And as your cohort sitting there next to you would say, you're kind of a short timer. All right. All right. On the motion, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. Okay. All right, let's take up the last item, 23, the IT issue. Mr. Wilkinson, come on up.
Hi, John Wilkinson, IT Director. This item is a flattening of the IT organization. You'll see in your material there's a current org chart that is a little more complicated than where we'd like to go. That is on the third page of the material. That's this org chart. And where we want to go is with something a lot more flat. We recently had two pretty high-level people retire from the IT department, and that that gives us an opportunity to get the ball rolling on some of this, and some of the recommendation that the Los Adams folks made as well. We actually have the ability with their salaries to replace 2 people with 3 people and expand our staffing a little bit. That'll allow us to it'll allow us to do more. We have a backlog of projects. We have always a backlog of PCs that need to be fixed. We have a number of very complex systems that we don't have adequate backup personnel for. So we may have we do have, in fact, a pretty complicated email system. We have really one expert at that system, and we have these kind of situations all over in IT. Our backup system is that way. The document imaging and management stuff is that way. So we need to get more staff people because we have to get some other folks that are trained on these kind of systems. And most basically, we have to improve our PC support. So the new org chart would be a lot flatter, and that is what this chart is. And that's what we're asking you to approve today, is to allow us to take 2 relatively expensive positions and turn them into 3 relatively inexpensive positions.
Hang on one second, Nico. While we have you here, Mark, have you looked at this?
Look to the Brain Trust first. We have not specifically looked at this, but I believe it's reflective of the conversations that we've had in terms of our efficiency study. I think it's reflective of the needs we see from the IT department. I believe if you also, within some of the details within our report, look at the IT is one of the areas that's really easy to benchmark against the industry, and we happen to do a lot of the work in that area. The department is under-resourced in that regard in terms of the equipment it's caring for and its backlog. And so I guess the long-winded answer is, I think we believe that what is being proposed makes sense.
Nick, you're city manager, you're okay?
We are, and in fact, the IFC took a look at this, and they also recommended approval for it.
On the last page of our package, there's a salary analysis. My question is, it shows total top compensation for retired positions. Was that the actual, or is that the potential? I just want to differentiate between our actual savings versus our potential savings.
Okay, if you're looking at the number, the $303,000 number,
Yes.
that is where they would top out.
So it's not what they were actually making
No,
at that time?
where they actually are is about $252,000. And where we would actually go would be around $208,000. So we would be replacing, this is fiscal year 15 figures, $252,000 worth of salary expenses with $208,000 of salary expenses. That's the immediate impact. The long-term impact would be those other figures, $303,000 versus $262,000.
So going forward, it doesn't change much?
No, it's lower. Yes.
Right, 44,000 versus 40,500.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Public comment? Anybody want to weigh in? Don't see any. Board? Motion's in order.
I move to approve the reorganization of the Information Systems Department by reclassifying a vacant IT manager position and a vacant systems administrator position into 3 IT systems technician positions, increasing overall department staffing level by 1 for a total of 10 full-time employees.
Motion and a second on the motion. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Carried unanimous. So go to non-action items. Board members, anything? Tomorrow, I'll just mention that tomorrow night at 5:30, we're going to be doing the state Christmas tree and the city Christmas tree, the ice rink, lots of different things happening tomorrow night at 5:30. So hopefully it'll be a good snowy evening where we can celebrate snow and Christmas, and out in the front steps of the Capitol at 5:30. So.
And
Yeah.
I just want to, briefly, I know I had a discussion with the city manager about, we renewed the contract from Mary Walker. Will she be coming to the board for a presentation?
She's going to come January 15th to that. It'll be our second meeting in January. She'll come, she'll brief broadly the upcoming legislative agenda and what her program is.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? We ready to adjourn? All right, unless there's an objection, we're adjourned. Hey, we're not adjourned yet. Hold on, open meeting law. Last public comment. Anybody? I apologize. I don't think anybody walked out before I ran the gavel down. Okay. I don't see any public comment on concluding public comment. Thanks for keeping me.
Randy just got shorter in the tooth.
Yeah, well, I hope I made the right, I think I did ask for public comment on the other one, Randy. I think I did. All right, because I'm getting long in the tooth, too. All right, we're adjourned.